Good evening. This work session of the ISD 279 School Board is being held in the Forum Room of the Educational Service Center on Tuesday, June 10th, 2025. The work session is being audio recorded. The recording will be made available on the district website within 2 business days after the work session has ended. With regard to the audio recording, our communication staff has asked that we share a friendly reminder that side conversations during the work session are picked up by the recorder and can affect sound quality. Also, conversations during transitions between agenda items are on the recording as well. The intent of the school board work session is to allow for school board discussion on topics. Work sessions do not include an opportunity for audience members to address the board. To acknowledge attendance this evening, I'll ask that all present at the table state their names, starting with the person to the left.
Tanya Prince, school board member.
Keith Tate, school board member.
Erica Foster, school board member.
Amy Moore, general counsel.
Ryan Severson Hall, executive director of community engagement.
Brian Bass, assistant superintendent. I think it was assistant superintendent.
Valerie Dolphin, the district's lobbyist.
John Morstead, Executive Director of Finance and Operations.
Kay Bloll, executive director of community relations.
Anthony Paternis, executive director of technology.
Sarah Mitchell, school board member.
Kelsey Dawson, school board member.
Kim Heil, superintendent.
Where are we? And I, Thomas Brooks, school board member and present. The purpose of school board work session is to build trust and teamwork, to exchange information, and when applicable, to provide direction in order to facilitate efficient and effective decision-making at regular board meetings. Dr. Heil, will you please share your check-in?
All right, thank you, Vice Chair Brooks. Welcome everyone this evening. We're going to dive right into with the legislative update, and I'll have John Morstead introduce, well, she's not guest, our family, but go ahead.
The person who needs no introduction.
Yeah, that needs no
Next,
introduction.
Valerie Wilson, who probably had a little limited sleep from last night, but is here nonetheless to talk about what was approved. So I'll turn it right over to you, Valerie.
Great, thank you, and thank you for having me. Well, I'm happy to say the legislature has adjourned not only its regular legislative session, but the special session that was called by Governor Walz. They met yesterday morning, and the House adjourned around 11, and the Senate adjourned around 2 in the morning. We do have a 2-year state budget in place now, so there's no threat of any state government shutdown. As a reminder, I did include information in your board packet. It's mostly accurate, but I was writing it before the special session began, and so some of the information might be a little different than what is in the board packet. So the special session adjourned, I would say, or unfolded with a lot less drama than the way the 2025 legislative session began. I'm not going to necessarily rehash a lot of that, but as you know, there was about 6 weeks of a lot of spits and starts and a lot of disagreement due to a tie or not a tie in the House, as well as a tie in the Senate. But eventually, after all that unfolded, they did start getting down to business of passing a budget. The budget forecast did show significant budget deficits, especially in the out years, in the next biennium, not the next biennium, but the biennium after that. And so the legislature and the governor really kind of, it took them a long time to try to figure out how to put forward a 2-year state budget with the intent of trying to address the budget deficit in the in the tails, the 27-28 biennium. The education, finance, and policy bill that passed during the special session, they had an overall budget target of 0 for the next biennium, which is FY26 and 27, but they also had to reduce the education budget by $420 million. We did have some, I think, a really significant victory in the final agreement. The Senate had wanted to kind of put a pause on the inflationary factors that were put into the formula. The House and the Senate would not agree to that, and so ultimately the automatic inflation factor between 2 and 3% remains in place. But there are budget cuts in the bill, but there is some additional funding for school districts. Most notably, there is one-time funding for a compensatory hold harmless of about $55 million. They did not come up with a longer-term solution on what to do with compensatory, partly because that just was much too costly. So we did get the one-time funding, and then they've established a task force to look at a long-term funding solution and to figure out what an appropriate compensatory funding formula should be. Some cuts that are in the bill are the special education transportation reimbursement is reduced by $43 million next biennium and another $48 million after that. There is some thought that the cross subsidy will help address some of those costs, but I think that this provision is causing a lot of concerns. Another one that kind of popped up in the leadership negotiations at the end of session, was never introduced as a bill, did not have any public testimony or public hearing, was the establishment of a blue ribbon commission on special education. And its goal is to find $250 million in savings. And if that commission cannot come up with $250 million in savings, then in the FY 28-29 biennium, special education aid would be cut by a commensurate amount. Yeah. There are some other additional cuts. The student support personnel aid was reduced, school library aid was reduced, as well as school lunch meal reimbursement aid. And then there was a proposal, this doesn't necessarily impact OSSEO, but the allowable uses of long-term facility maintenance revenue was expanded to include the replacement of roofs. There were some policy proposals, and I think this bill is notable in that there aren't the significant policy changes that you all faced from the 2023 legislative session. It was a priority, I would say, especially for the House Republicans, to not add any new mandates. They wanted to repeal some mandates, but because of the tie in the House and the makeup of the Senate and the governor, repealing a lot of mandates wasn't really on the cards. But I know House Republicans worked to make sure there were minimal, if any, new mandates. Some of the policy proposals that did pass were you can start school on September 1st or later in the 26 and 27 school years. Short call substitute, emergency substitute pilot program was made permanent, and there was a mandated $200 daily rate for that pay of those subs that was removed. You will have a little more flexibility with the uses of literacy incentive aid, which is now called literacy aid. It no longer will spell out all of the uses. You can use literacy aid for whatever you've identified in your literacy plan. And then there was a working group that was established to look at the use of seclusion as an emergency procedure. One of the new mandates that was added was school districts are going to be required to develop a cardiac arrest intervention plan, that districts can use the policy, the model policy that's determined by the Department of Education. On unrelated, outside of the education bill, there were some other key areas that passed of interest to schools. One is there were some modest changes to earned safe and sick time. I think going into session, there was a big hope that there could be more changes to earned safe and sick time and paid leave, but alas, that did not happen again because of the makeup of the legislature.
Bless you.
But two changes to earned safe and sick time. It would allow an employer to request reasonable documentation of the need to use ESST after 2 consecutive scheduled work days instead of 3. And then it would allow an employer to prorate earned safe and sick time hours for part-time employees and employees hired mid-year. And then the next item I did not include in the update that's in your packet, but there was also regarding paid leave, there was a decrease in the premium rate from 1.2% to 1.1%. And these were all part of the jobs and labor bill. And then lastly, there was, in the labor bill, there was an appropriation of $3.5 million a year to establish a competitive grant program for a teacher apprenticeship program. Those are kind of starting in a number of areas across the state. The intermediates have one as well, and so there's some ongoing funding for that. And then I would just note, in the judiciary bill that passed during the regular session, there is a language that would allow you to suspend a data request if someone fails to show up to inspect the data. And then lastly, the elections and state government bill did allow school board meetings to be, school board members to participate in school board meetings virtually. And then lastly, one of the bills that passed before the end of the regular session was a leadership agreement to provide $100 million in one-time funds for the unemployment insurance for summer term employees. The House Republicans really wanted to repeal that program, but alas, again, because of the makeup of the legislature, the House, they didn't have the votes, and in the Senate. But they did agree to one-time funding for that mandate. And my understanding is that would cover about this term, summer term, and next summer term for that requirement. So the legislature did adjourn. There is some talk that they might have a special session this fall. It all depends, I think, on what happens at the federal level with the budget bill. And there is some concern that there could be some holes in the state budget because of potential cuts in Medicaid. And so there is some talk that they might come back in a special session to deal with that. But if not, the 2026 session begins on February 17th. And then I did just want to add, ASIO has had some really great advocacy, and I did note some of the kind of examples of where the platform, what was aligned with the ASIO platform had passed. And I know that John had come to the Capitol quite a bit. He testified at least once or twice, representing some issues related to compensatory and unemployment insurance and earned safe and sick time, I believe. That's it for my update. I'm available for any questions.
Thank you. School board members, any questions?
I did have a quick question. Oh, I have a couple, but just clarification. So the Blue Ribbon Task Force, when they say $250 million in savings, like, do they? I mean, from where? Like, do they? I'm just curious.
Very good question. I don't know that they will find $250 million in savings. I think they don't understand the complexity of the cost of special education.
And it's find the savings or you're losing it anyway, right?
Yeah.
Well, and keep in mind, that's what this legislature said in Oswego. Hang on, the committee couldn't find anything, don't just take $250 million, find something else. You'll just push that into the next legislature to say.
Figure it out.
It's just a fancy way to punt and make it look like you cut $250 million in the future, but not have to deal with any of the repercussions of what you actually did say cut.
Yep.
And so the other question I had was around the seclusion. How does that impact? Like, what is that when they talk about that, and like why did it come up? And because didn't they took it away, and then
yeah. So in 2023, a law was passed that limited seclusion. A district could not use seclusion in up through grade 3, but you could use seclusion rooms from grades 4 through 12. There is a senator from the East Metro who has a son who went to a level 4 program and felt very strongly that proposal was made in error, and that allowing a seclusion room in those younger grades gives school districts and parents an option if their child needs that. Now, there's very strict laws in statute about how seclusion can be used, when it can be used, who it can be used by, but it was very controversial. And she had a proposal to kind of roll back, or her proposal would have allowed seclusion, would have prohibited seclusion through grade 6 unless a parent explicitly agreed to it as part of the IEP.
Okay.
But the disability advocacy community was very opposed to that, as well as the Department of Education. Ultimately, what ended up in the bill was a working group to look at this is it a measure a tool that school districts need, especially primarily in the level 3 and level 4 setting programs.
Okay, and then the last question about the aid you were saying. What was it for the $3.5 million for apprenticeship? Right? Is that what it is?
Yeah, it's to establish a competitive grant for school districts or a group of school districts that would like to set up a teacher apprenticeship program. So it's modeled after what we know about regarding like an electrician, other trades, electricians, pipe fitters, plumbers, etc. And the four intermediates have a model in place, and where they're paraprofessionals embedded on the job training and appropriate coursework to move towards becoming fully licensed. In the intermediate programs, it's EBD and autism, but there are other districts around, a few other districts around the state that have model as well. So this funding would just go to more districts to try to establish that.
So I think our big question will be when we model the financials on what this means for us. So, but it's nice to have the
Kelly
virtual
will-
option.
Kelly will present you that
Okay.
shortly.
Oh, it's already in. It's already in.
We did an option knowing we were going into this
Okay.
because we knew the special session, they could change it, but I mean, honestly, they did a good job of here's our agreement, we're gonna stick to it. And they did, so we modeled what we knew, just to at least be able to present it to you tonight. So we'll show you that one.
Perfect.
I would touch on the food service one that came up too. That's, first of all, not till the 28-29 school year. And the reduction for us, I believe, Jeff, what did you say, was like $75,000, $80,000?
About $85,000. It goes down from 12.5 cents to 6.25
Yeah.
cents. We get that in Minnesota in addition over the federal reimbursement. Not all states do, but Minnesota is one, so $85,000 impact.
So a fairly minimal hit to a $15 million budget.
So with the school lunch, so they kept the school lunch, universal lunch. So they didn't, nothing got added around like stopping it at a certain
No.
income.
There were proposals to do
Yeah.
that, but
Mhm.
that did not advance.
And the only question I have is the telecommunications access aid. Do we know how that affects us?
So fortunately for us, we do not get any of that telecommunications aid because in order to get it, you have to be part of a communications cluster, which means you're kind of in a joint powers with multiple districts, kind of going through RFP process to jointly get in internet services for multiple districts. We do not participate in one of those communication clusters, but I've got several colleagues who will be greatly impacted because it's an addition after E-rate comes in. So for some school districts where they don't have as much E-rate dollars coming in, it's a huge impact on reducing their internet costs, but will not impact us in Osseo.
Thank you. All right, thank you, as always.
Thank you, Valerie. Okay, we'll keep moving and we'll introduce the 2025-26 budget. John, you'll introduce your team or you'll just start out for now?
Yeah, I got you.
Okay.
All
All right.
right. So good evening again. Tonight we will be giving the board members the first look at the proposed budget for fiscal year 2026. June represents a culmination of our long-range financial planning process over the past year that includes this presentation and the request for approval that we will bring to the school board on June 24th. The board will have spent parts of 9 different work sessions and board meetings receiving information, giving direction, and acting on the fiscal 26 budget to approve the final comprehensive budget. This evening, we'll go through the important elements of the fiscal 26 budget, and we'll review the 5-year financial forecast tool for our operating funds. Before I turn it over to our team to take you through those items, I want to provide some context for what we'll be reviewing. We'll also highlight some changes in our assumptions, as well as updates to how we will present this information. This is that part we've done a few times. The new financial model just looks a little bit different than it has in the long history, but I didn't update my note, sorry. Because much of the information is new, just follow along, ask questions at the end, please. For our assumptions, we regularly review our assumptions for both revenues and expenditures to make sure that the most accurate projection is possible. The following assumptions best reflect changes in legislation and our trends going forward. Starting with revenue assumptions for the general education formula The base amount the state provides per pupil are now based on the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, with a minimum of 2% and a cap of no more than 3%. For fiscal year '26, we will receive, as Valerie had mentioned previously, 2.74% is the CPI amount that was highlighted for the year. And our forecast will follow the CPI projections that are currently out by MDE for fiscals '27 through '30, going with it through the end of our forecast. The Gen Ed formula only affects just over half of our revenue total. Our general formula increase should be more predictable in following the Consumer Price Index. Expenditure assumptions have been a little bit more volatile over the past few years, but if you look at a longer average over 10 years, we're still at approximately 3%. So far in the projections we're going to show you, we're still planning to maintain the 3% expense assumption. However, with substantial increases, specifically in transportation costs that begin in fiscal year '26, along with contract settlements exceeding the 3% annual threshold, we may need to make the decision to revise upward to 3.5% in the future to better reflect actual expenditures. The 5-year financial projection model includes our operating capital and capital projects technology levies that will both be in year 3 in this particular financial year. As you're aware, our operating levy is very near the statutorily imposed cap, meaning we've lost the opportunity to increase revenue in the future unless there's a change in state law. As we update the financial projection model for the new range of years, this year we added fiscal year 2030 to the last year of our projection, which in turn increases our deficit spending. This is the fiscal cliff that you will routinely hear referred to by schools. We'll show you 2 forecast models this evening. The first shows our forecast based on the current law, and when we did this and got it all prepared for you, that was not yesterday, so the law prior to yesterday. And since the legislature now has completed their work, the second showing should be a pretty close reflection of what the laws that they just passed yesterday are. Any changes that we did not include in that, we'll just update in the mid-year budget in February. So getting started, you'll see on the first page some of the key contact points that we have had with the school board during the LRFP process, including the levy preliminary and final approvals, direction in the planning process and initial budget development, approval of the fiscal 2025 mid-year adjustments and fiscal '26 operating or pair and capital adjustments. And I would now like to turn over to Kelly Benusa, Director of Business Services. As you know, our district has a very robust budget process, and Kelly, along with the Assistant Director of Business Services, Mike Hewler, and Coordinator of Business Services, Michelle Larson, work tirelessly to guide their team and everyone involved through that process to get us to today. So very special thanks to them for all their efforts, and Kelly will walk you through the summary of the general fund budget, and we'll have Jeff Ansorge, Director of Food and Nutrition Services, will go through the Food and Nutrition Service financial forecast, followed by Brian Severson Hall, Executive Director of Community Engagement, to present the Community Education forecast. Kelly will then wrap up with the capital budget forecast. Kelly, it's all yours.
Great, so good evening. I'm not sure which documents you have printed out or which ones you have electronic access to. There's a smaller packet that was attached to the materials. That's what's going to be up on the screen, but it's going to be kind of small and detailed. So you might not want to try and strain your eyes on that. So does everybody have something they can follow on? Great. So in addition to the Business Services Leadership Team in compiling the budget, I just want to extend a thank you to all of our budget managers across our district for all the assistance that they put together in compiling this data and answering questions along the way to make sure that the information presented tonight is as accurate as possible. So this year has continued to be challenging from a financial and funding standpoint, as we just heard. And adoption for this '26 budget is no exception to this year. So we're going to start with either the budget document, if you're using that one, or else it's the first page in that shorter document this evening, so that budget memo, so page 1. So again, as John mentioned, the timeline shows the fiscal year '26 budget planning process, and this process intentionally provides multiple opportunities for the board to take direction. to provide correction, detailed correction. The second page of that memo then gets into the details. So we provided comparisons for the fiscal year 26 budget in two different ways. The first comparison is of the proposed adopted budget for fiscal year 26 and the revised budget for fiscal year 25. The table shows a planned decrease of $22.7 million to fund balance for fiscal year 26. The fund balance is equivalent to just over 13 weeks or a little more than 3 months of operations. There are several adjustments included in the proposed fiscal year 26 budget, and those adjustments include the board approved February 25th, 26 budget adjustments for a net increase of almost $2.9 million. It's comprised of several items through the LRP process, one of which is the delay. We're going to be delaying the repurposing of the new site to fiscal year 27. So I'll save us $350,000 in 26, but then we'll take it in 27. The enrollment alignment of $2.1 million. The state leaves of absence time-off requirements for $30,000. The Family Medical Leave Act expansion of payroll tax for $933,000. And operating capacity for the new elementary of $326,000. The board also provided direction on February 11th regarding the 279 online program reconfiguration for 26, resulting in savings of almost $922,000. The board approved on February 25th the 25 mid-year budget adjustment one-time savings, $236,000, which are now included back into the 26 adopted budget, and then as planned, the fiscal year 25 strategic investments for 1 year only of commitment were removed, and the compensatory maximum whole harmless estimate of $5.5 million is added to the budget. So with all of those adjustments, the percentage increase in the expenditure budget is 9.1%, which is above that 3% trend target. The projected year-end fund balance is $88.3 million for fiscal year 26, or 25.4% of expenditures. So moving on to page 3 of the memo, the second comparison is the proposed adopted budget for fiscal year 26 versus the fiscal year 26 5-year financial projection model that was shared with the board on February 25th. The proposed adopted budget shows spending more fund balance than initially projected by $12.4 million. Revenues here are lower by $192,000. So I'm just going to quickly walk through what those adjustments are. So our operating revenue is decreasing by $2.4 million. It's a combination of students projected and market value. Our summer unemployment is increasing by $1.5 million. The TRA pension adjustment revenue, which has an offset in expenditures for the rate increase, is an increase of $1.3 million. The interest revenue decrease is $1.2 million. And then our general education aid formula is increasing by 2.74% or $200 on the basic formula allowance. And we have an adjustment between projected from February to the actual adopted budget, and that's why you're seeing a decrease in $1 million. We have an increase for student support personnel aid of $740,000, which is offset by expenditures. We have an increase in third-party medical assistance billing revenue of $396,000, abatement revenue increase of $366,000, an increase in desegregation transportation based on an increase in our 25 costs of $300,000, and then we have a special education decrease, which includes that reversal of the prior year over-accrual of $1.7 million for a decrease of $200,000, along with some other miscellaneous items. Then if we go to the fourth page of the memo, we can see that our expenditures are $12.2 million higher than anticipated in that 3% category. And then if we look at our expenditures, we think of them in those 4 big categories: salaries, benefits, purchase services, and other. And so to walk through each of those sections, when we think about the salaries, our biggest adjustment over that 3% is our projected settlements, and then our total FTE adjustments. We always take those adjustments in salary and then realigning the benefits at mid-year. We are adding back salaries from the 25 mid-year for those one-time savings, almost $1.3 million additional cost. We have the savings from the 279 online program reconfiguration for 26 of $921,000. And then we have attrition and allocation of our staff, $200,000. So moving on to benefits, we have an increase of almost $1.9 million for our medical insurance and our employee plan migration to different plans, and then adding back the 36 open positions from 25, we see an increase of almost $1.4 million. So now we're seeing the offset of that revenue, the TRA pension rate. So it's increasing from 8.75% to 9.5% effective July 1st, from an increase of almost $1.3 million. Then when we look at our long-term disability insurance, we just got new rates on those insurances, and their savings of 63%, or almost $569,000. And some other smaller items round out the savings in that area. When we move on to purchase services, we have an increase of almost $4.8 million. Again, as John mentioned, the largest increase in that area is our transportation contract, which for next year is increasing almost 32%, or $6.9 million. Then we have savings where we don't automatically increase our expenditures. And so those are staying at 0% increase for next year. So they don't even get that 3%. And that's saving us another $1.4 million. Then we have an add back of purchase services from our mid-year adjustment. And so that's a decrease of $183,000. We have an increase in the utility area of electric for $506,000. And then a smaller decrease in tuition in District 287 that's anticipated of $127,000. And then we're moving some supplies of $100,000 out and putting them into other services. Moving on to the last category then, our other services, those are increasing $1.8 million. We're seeing a judgment increase of almost $1.9 million. And then when we look at our curriculum adoption budget capacity, we're increasing that $531,000 for some allowable carryover. And then our other services are also savings $280,000. And then we have a federal indirect rate change from the prior year. So it was 1.5% for fiscal year 25. It's moving to 4.1%. And that's going to save us $312,000. And then our other budget capacity, which is being moved from the purchase services over into the supplies, an increase of $100,000. So now the last page of the memo talks about our next steps. So our next steps are on June 24th. We'll bring the adopted budget for fiscal year 26 for all the funds in front of the board for their board approval. And in July, we'll start preparation for our fiscal year 25 audit. And then on November 18th, we'll bring the finalized audit in front of the board for acceptance of the 25 audit results. So next, we're going to review the projection models. So starting with the fiscal year 27 5-year financial projection. So there's 3 models in your packet for the general fund. We're going to skip the first one, that's the February model. We're going to move on to the one titled General Fund. So again, a little bit of history with our budget process. Once again, it was a strategic priority a number of years ago, and we had 2 goals or outcomes for this strategic priority. The first one was to build a framework, and that's the model we refer to. And the second one was to design this document that's on your screen. It's a long-range financial forecast model. So the projection is a high-level visual organizer for the financial forecast. It has detailed information supporting the projection model and is provided on the following page of each of these documents for more detail. And this allows for multiple opportunities to view this information. So there's 3 sections to this projection, which is the same for all the funds that are being presented tonight. However, the assumption and parameters are differentiated by fund. So this evening, again, we prepared, as John has mentioned, 2 versions of this projection model for the general fund. The first version is based on current law and included a 2.7% increase to the basic formula allowance. And then the second version includes revenue and expenditure tactics based on what we knew on June 2nd for information that was being released for the 25 legislative session. So the top section of this first version shows the revenue expenditures, differences, fund balances, and then fund balance percentage for a 7-year window that begins with fiscal year 24's actual amounts. Then we have the revised budget and the adopted budget for fiscal year 26, those are in blue, and then projections for fiscal years 27 and fiscal years 2030. So you're going to see some operational adjustments totaling $13 million under the chart. This line is used to highlight any needed adjustments. So again, those operational reductions are included in the expenditures listed above. So the assumptions section shows the revenue and expenditure assumptions being used for fiscal years 27 through fiscal years 2030. So for the revenue assumptions, we have those increasing. So again, they're going to fluctuate between 2 and 3%, the general or basic formula allowance, with the most recent estimates from the Minnesota Department of Education being included for fiscal years 27 through fiscal year 2030. Then moving on to the expenditure assumptions, again, those are being projected to increase 3%, which is consistent with our prior year tactics and isn't being changed at this time, but we'll be closely monitoring those, as John mentioned. So if we exceed that 3% for cost, we'll be outside of those parameters. It would be deficit spending at a greater rate than what's on the projection. Then moving on to the middle section, it shows the budget projection for the revenues in blue and the expenditures in red. And those trend lines of the same color show the annual actual budget or projections for each of those items. So as you can see, even with that general formula allowance for the revenue being tied to inflation, expenditures are still expected to continue to outpace our revenues. The final section then looks at the fund balance projection for that same period. So the green bars represent our actual and projected fund balance for each of those years. And then the orange bar shows the minimum required fund balance of 5% as set in board policy. Again, those trend lines show the annual projected fund balance related to the minimum. And as you can see, operational reductions are needed to maintain that board required minimum fund balance of 5%. So at this time for this model, we are planning for operational reductions starting in fiscal year 28, $3 million, followed by $4 million, and then an additional $6 million for that total of $13 million. So to provide some context, without the operational reductions, our fund balance would go negative in fiscal year 30 by 0.9%, which would put us then into statutory operating debt or SOD. Districts in SOD are required to then file plans that have to be approved by the Minnesota Department of Education and how they plan to get out of that debt. So key factors included in the projection model are, and this is on the detail page behind this one, increasing our special education cross subsidy up to 50%, and then additional special education revenue for those increased costs with our contract for the portions of special education, transportation, and 504 transportation. And that revenue is also received 1 year after the expense occurs. Recovery of judgment costs from fiscal year 25 through the property tax levy system, and then increased English enrollment revenue starting in fiscal year 27. So expenditure tactics include adding $1.2 million for the remaining operating capacity for the new elementary school in 27, and then adding the impact of the 10-year approved transportation contract for future years. So we are again delaying the 1 year, adding the $350,000 for the Crestview new site startup costs, which were approved to begin in fiscal year 26, and then removing the $5.5 million for the compensatory maximum hold harmless estimate for fiscal year 27. So now we're going to go to the next model for the general fund. So the second projection model contains proposed legislative updates for the general fund. So again, just key differences here include a slight decrease to our financial health, increasing our operational reductions from a combined $13 million to a combined $14 million for those outlying years, fiscal year 28 through 30. And then additional key factors included in the model are the student personnel aid reduction in 26, followed by an additional increase in fiscal year '28. And then we have the school library aid reduction of $136,000 for '26, followed by an additional reduction in '28. It's even smaller. Then we have our special education aid, which contains then the transportation reimbursement reduction. So currently we're reimbursed at 100% for our transportation costs, and in fiscal year '26 it would go to 95%, followed by a reduction of an additional 5%, so we'd be funded at 90%, starting in fiscal year '27. So then our expenditure tactics include adjustments for that student personnel aid and the school library aid, and then also adjustments for the compensatory, which would include reducing it to what we now know is $1,038,000 rather than the $5.5 million. So all of that details in your packets. Typically for the revenues and expenditure tactics, we maybe have 1 or 2 items. We have many, many more, which just goes to the complexity of what we're dealing with right now. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff to go through the nutrition financial picture.
Thank you. So food and nutrition services, we're Fund 2, we're self-funded. We don't rely on the general fund for our revenue. It's off of reimbursement from breakfast, lunch, snack, any a la carte sales that we have. And the projection is set up the same as Kelly went over for the general fund. On the top here, just to recap where we're at with 2024. So in 2024, we had a revenue of just under 18 million and expenditures of slightly over 17 million. So we were able to increase our fund balance by 949,000. Now our fund balance, we have a target of 12% that we want to maintain. And looking at in 2024, last year ended, we were at a 33.9. For 2025, on that top section, after mid-year, we reviewed and we're projecting an increase of 218,000 to a fund balance for this current year. And then looking at the 5-year projection of 2026 through 2030, we don't show any operational adjustments necessary to maintain that 12%. At the end of 2030, we're seeing it at 18% without operational adjustments. The assumptions for revenue is a 2.75 annual increase, and assumptions for expenditures over the years are 3% annually. So we see from 2026 to 2030, similar to the general fund, we see expenditures outpacing revenues slightly. And then at the bottom, with the fund balance projection, you see our fund balance heading down from 32.9 as of last year to 18.3%. So we'll still maintain that 12%, above that 12% fund balance. This didn't take into account the reduction of 6.25%. As John mentioned before, it's about $85,000. That'll have an effect as well. And yeah, other than that, I think that we're pretty healthy. And when we budget from a food cost perspective, we're very conservative. For example, mid-year this past year, we were at a 42%. I generally budget 2 percentage points cushion into my food cost. So these reductions in fund balance, I feel are going to be slightly less than what's portrayed on this here. So that's all I have for food service.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm going to cover the community service fund, and I just have mainly 4 key talking points. And the first one, as you can see across the revenue line, we continue to see steady participation growth in our community education programs, which is great, which for us results in more revenue, obviously. And just a reminder, approximately 75 to 80% of our revenue is participation fees. So anytime you see an increase in revenue, what you're really seeing is an increase in participation. So when you're thinking about budget to students, youth, and adults who are participating. Also on here, you can see purposeful fund balance spend down. You can see at the end of 2024, it was all the way up to 38% fund balance, which is way higher than the range that I'd like to keep it at. Some folks, some of you in here have heard me share this before, but I'm a big fan of Price is Right. So like the range game, you know the range game, you remember that game? I try to keep our fund balance in the range of 7 to 15%. I don't like it to go below 7% because if we have an off year on participation, we work just like Jeff shared with Food and Nutrition Services. We're a self-funded department, so we need to have money there in case we have a down year. And then I don't like to see it go above 15% because for me that feels like we're just charging participants too much money, and we're not a for-profit that's looking to give money to our shareholders, right? So that's kind of why when I talk about the 7 to 15% range, that's what I'm talking about. So the good news, you can see by the time we hit 2027, 2028, we're back in the range, right? We're back in what our goal tends to be. And we did get a little high. Part of the reason we got so high is because our participation came back more quickly than we could recover our staff that we had to lay off during the pandemic. So that's why you saw a little bit more of that gap happening. But that has fortunately leveled off. I think I've shared with this team, we were fully staffed last summer, we were fully staffed this school year, and we're fully staffed for summer programs that start on Friday, right? So we're in a good spot where the budget trend should be a little more stable, I would say. And then the only other, my last comment would be this school year did end up being excellent for us, and we were close to $1 million better on our fund balance than we thought we might be in November. And how that plays out for us is any of our operational reductions that had previously been scheduled in 2027 have been pushed out all the way to 2028, and they've been reduced by over $700,000. So we're hoping that trend keeps going and that changes, but that's a very positive trend for us. And I would say maybe one added comment would be, after hearing Val's report, I would say the legislative session was pretty neutral for us in the community education field. So we didn't have any increase to our funding, but we also didn't have anything that significantly impacted us in a negative way either. So there were some proposals at the very beginning of legislation that could have been negative for community ed, but they were pulled. So overall, this is a good budget for us to report on. Excited that we're kind of getting back to our more level revenue and expenditures and in the right range for our fund balance. So those would be the main talking points for this particular budget.
So the last fund that we're going to look at tonight then is the capital fund. So up on the screen you can see it. We do have some operational adjustments under that first chart. And the assumptions for this fund include our revenues and expenditures staying at 0% for 27 through fiscal year 2030. That middle section again shows our budget projection for revenues in blue and expenditures in red. And as planned, our expenditures are projected to outpace our revenues beginning in fiscal year 27. And then that last section looks at the fund balance projection for that same time period. And the green bars represent our actual and projected fund balances for each of those years, and then the orange bar shows the minimum required fund balance of 10%, and the green lines show the annual projected fund balances related to that minimum. At this time, we're planning for operational increases of $1.9 million, which are spread over the next 4 years to maintain again that 10% fund balance target, and the detail is behind the visual organizer for this fund. And then the last item is just talking about the big budget document that we put out on the once the board approves the budget on June 24th, and it contains 5 sections. So the first section is the introductory section with that executive summary, which provides just another review of the 26 budgets. And then the organizational section, which includes district level information. in the financial section, then that includes those key policies and visual displays of our budget data. And then the fourth section is the information section, which we've just taken some of the data out of, as well as enrollment projections and staffing allocations. And then the last section is the benchmark comparison for data points with our benchmark districts. And with that, I'll turn it back over to John.
I'll turn it over to Thomas for any questions.
Thank you. School board members, questions?
Thank you. I do have a question, Brian, around community ed, and I think I've kind of asked it before, and I'm really passionate. I do think that community ed has an opportunity to be a really powerful kind of equalizer. And it's expensive. I mean, I know it's not a money maker necessarily, but I mean, I always look at my own family of 4, and my kids just can't be in, things like that other, we just don't have the resources to do that, and I imagine that's, reflective of many in our community. And so I'm just curious around, do we have data talking about showing who's participating in our district, maybe who isn't, or who are not maybe reaching? And then I guess I'm curious, do we have any programming that's on us, like sliding scales? Are we partnering with, have we explored partnerships with foundations or different organizations? Because what I've noticed is in our district we have opportunities around academics, but I also think kids need beyond, right? Like, it can't just be always, that's not fun all the time for kids. I mean, Camp Rocks is great, but it's not like baseball, and it's not art and theater, and I'm just very, 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 very passionate about ensuring that our young people have a full educational experience, because I think that's what, when you do, you think about your future, it's how kids stay more engaged and how kids get excited. And I remember during COVID, it wasn't so much the academics kids were missing, it was that social connectedness. And I remember Brooklyn Bridge Alliance also did a survey amongst their youth, and that is the one thing during COVID that was missing, was being part of something kind of greater than yourself and those opportunities. And so I'm very, 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 very passionate about it. And so again, I love I think all your programming is great, but I'm just more out of curiosity, kind of looking at what's your vision around that piece.
Yeah. So, well, I share your passion for that. You covered a lot of ground. So I would say a couple things. So there's a wide range on our programs on, like KidStop, for example, is 100% fee-based, pretty much, right? And then you have programs that are completely free, like targeted services, right? The entire EC and FE program is on a sliding fee scale. So yes, we do. I can either figure out a way to do that in a written presentation for y'all. I'm doing it in my brain right now.
Well, and I could ask, I know you would ask us for work session topics, and maybe that would be an
we could do that.
appropriate
I'd be
place
happy to do that work session.
conversation.
EC and FE is interesting. The majority of our folks who participate in EC and FE either come in at the low end of the sliding scale or the high end. So we tend to have families who pay very little fees, or people who pay 100%. We don't have as many in the middle, which is interesting, right? Because they track that very closely. Certainly like ABE, we get state and federal funding for ABE, right? So that's one program where we do get funding. But I'd be happy to, because we do track that.
Yeah.
We track.
Well, I know, for example, I always bring personal examples. This week you have this basketball camp at Osseo, and there's a morning and night, and I've had friends, and it's phenomenal. Everybody's having a great experience. But if you can't afford to go, then you just, so I'm just more curious of how, and I'll put this in our Google Doc, Tanya, but I think it would be really cool to start to explore what are some other, whether it's foundations or different government entities, kind of what's out there for even scholarship funds or something that we can go kind of beyond to make those connections. I think would be really great, because I see City of Brooklyn Park does a lot of that, with their Park on the Go, or Rec on the Go, they'll just show up places.
And I think, Brian, I know we could also pull out the last time you presented. Maybe it's been a few years, but I know we have those historical documents, and it might be is that still the same or what's changed? But I know you've mentioned before you do a lot of conversations with the city so that there's not overlap or duplication. So having some scope, but maybe where is something uncovered, or if we want to intentionally have duplication for some benefit where we're capturing kids that would not otherwise be captured, I think that might be part of that discussion.
No, I'd be more than happy to
Yeah.
do a work session. Yeah, and we, this year we expanded after-school enrichment programs to 3 of our schools on the east side that we didn't have it before. And, we offered all the classes at a 75% discount. And so therefore I just, I spent $20,000+ in my fund balance to offer those programs, right? So there's, we have a lot of examples, and there certainly could be, City of Brooklyn Park's a great example. They've chosen to write into their city budget to fund after-school programs for youth, right? So those are choices that school districts and cities can make, right? There's nothing to say that the school board can't allocate money for these programs, right? Even though we're self-funded out of Fund 1, right? So I think those are awesome topics to have, and we look at that, our number one goal is that participation in community education programs reflects our community, right? So that's our standard, right? So we know where we're meeting that standard, and we know where we're not. Some of our programs were exceeding that standard, others were not, right? So those are, I'm always happy to report on where I think we're knocking it out the park, and I'm not happy to report out, but I'm always honest about reporting out where I think we're not meeting that standard, right? So that's one thing you can count on, but I would love to do a deeper dive, because we think about it all the time. And summer is probably, yes, there are some programs, well, we're expected to meet our expenses, but that we also offer a ton of programs that are free, little fee to no fee as well. So yeah, thanks, Kelsey, for asking that. It's at the heart of what we do.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, you have such a strong foundation in what you do within community ed, so I think even like leveraging what you are doing with the different relationships and kind of exploring that would be great.
And there's, I think, also an opportunity to see the full landscape and maybe amplify where there's non-district, non-city opportunities. And we're Kentucky actually in policy, how do we how do other programs have access to sharing the information in the district about those programs? So again, we can have more kids going to things that already exist and maybe aren't fully utilized.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Thank you.
Any others?
No, I guess I'd just point out, how much we're absorbing into the fund balance, and a lot of these expenses are things that we've known were likely to come to fruition, so it's not a surprise, even though it's a change. It's not a surprising change, since we've been discussing it all along. And the fact that we have the ability to absorb it is very significant in comparison to other districts across the state that are making the reductions and the cuts with very short notice, and that's quite shocking and impactful. So as always, thank you for the great work and the proactive nature and all of the iterations that go into this, and it pays off, and it pays off in that we don't have cuts that are impacting our students. So thank you.
I do have one quick question. So I'm trying to remember, this might have been in something in the past, but with the redistricting, was that net neutral as far as the number of kids that required busing?
It is close to.
Okay.
I think we're anticipating there could be a couple additional routes needed.
Okay.
But some of that is, with a new school, we know we're adding right there.
Right.
So I want to say there might be 1 or 2 more based on movement, but it's a lot better than some of the options presented. The one that ultimately the board approved was the most cost-effective of the choices.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, we'll move on to our next speakers. Review and monitoring report B&E. And we'll give a little time for letting your staff set up here after this.
May have a little tea on it.
It smells really good.
Lost sight of my lineage injured. Do you want me to stretch break or anything? We've been sitting for an hour. If you need to, no? Power through? Okay. Oh, thank you.
All right, so we'll go ahead and get started on monitoring report B&E, and Dr. Bass, I'll let you introduce who else is with you this evening, please.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Heil. Good evening, Chair Prince, Vice Chair Brooks, and members of the board. It is with a sustained spirit of excitement that we bring tonight's Vision Cards update for Strategic Directions B and E. Before we jump in, I want to thank our data and assessment team, led by Director of Learning Achievement, Dr. Joe Kine. I also want to thank the partnership with our other directors that are here this evening, Sunny Burskin, Student Services, and Dr. Michael Walker from Department of Educational Equity for your partnership in tonight's Reimagined Vision Cards. Thank you all for your persistence and brilliance in attempting to integrate all of the feedback shared along the way. Tonight's presentation outcomes include the following. So we'll learn about and discuss the data measures for the high priority initiatives for Strategic Direction B. We'll learn about the reframing of Strategic Direction E as the continuous improvement magnifier. For those of you who listen to the podcast, you already have a sneak peek at that one. And then number 3, explore the enhanced alignment between strategic priority system strategies and the measures that show implementation fidelity and impact. That's that system strategy snapshot piece that we were introduced to in May. So as a reminder, Vision Cards track the district's progress toward strategic goals by aligning data with the strategic roadmap that the board has set. Created by administrators with board guidance, Vision Cards measure performance, identify growth or gaps, and support continuous improvement through clear, measurable goals tied to the district's overall vision. So our definition statement, continuous improvement as a normed practice strives to fundamentally reimagine how to perform procedures and tasks to ensure transparency in reporting, proper resources that meet current needs, and anticipate future expectations and desired outcomes. So tonight, Strategic Directions B and E, and in conversations that we've had about the Strategic Directions in December of 2021, when the Strategic Directions were debated and discussed by the board at that time, there was language that I think we were striving for that we wanted those directions to reflect. And so in pursuit of language, we also introduced some tension around how do we measure all those things that are in those descriptors. So you'll see for Strategic Direction B, the overarching theme is a culture of achievement, right? A culture of achievement, and we look at it in terms of content-rich, rigorous, and pathways. And so that's what you're going to see data this evening when we get into B, is in those 3 big areas of how we're impacting that. Then for Strategic Direction E, as we're looking at this continuous improvement magnifier, how are we addressing, acknowledging, reducing these deep systemic disparities, barriers, and inequities? And then that other big chunk here is continuous improvement. So, we think we've done, I think we tried to do it justice in terms of Strategic Direction E being reframed as a continuous improvement magnifier and seeing that magnifier across all of the other strategic directions with an emphasis on continuous improvement. So, and we want your feedback. We want your, keep us honest on that, please. And then this slide, as we had back in May, introduces this overarching question of, are all of our initiatives aligned to the strategic priorities? And we believe that we're demonstrating more visibility of that. And so you'll see that throughout tonight's presentation.
Good evening. As you may recall, we partnered with the national nonprofit Educational Resource Strategies, which works with districts across the nation to develop systems to assess the impact of their strategies and to drive positive outcomes for students. And they call the process System Strategy ROI, we've changed it to System Strategies Snapshot. And the snapshot on the screen represents strategic direction B. It lists the priorities, the expected outcomes, strategies, process or implementation measures, outcome measures, and then it gets into the funding for some of the strategies, not all of the strategies. Yet that's still the work of the Vision Card Steering Committee. This System Strategy Snapshot represents strategic direction E. And just as a refresher, so we all have that shared vocabulary, the priority from each strategic direction is listed on our strategic plan. It's what's the most important for each strategic directions. Then we have an expected outcome, what we hope will happen if we focus on this priority. There's a list of strategies, process measures, implementation, how are we monitoring this along the way, and then lastly, outcome or impact measures. And as we move through tonight's presentation, we'll walk through a couple of these. So first, we have strategic direction B, build and nurture a culture of achievement by providing content-rich, rigorous, and equitable and individualized pathways. And as Dr. Bass mentioned, we really focused on achievement, rigorous, and pathways. So this is that high-level overview of the highest priority in strategic direction B, and that's ensure and confirm each scholar has access to high-quality core instruction and interventions across the system. So the expected outcome for this is that greater than 67% of students in grades 2 through 10 will achieve typical growth, which is at the 50th percentile or higher, as measured by FastBridge A reading, and growth by START score, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, as an indicator of high-quality core instruction. So a couple of our strategies are professional learning teams. Those are our teacher collaborative teams that meet to talk about student data, curriculum, assessment, and then also high-quality core instruction. We've spent a lot of time working with our learning leaders and our teachers about the 4 components of high-quality core instruction and monitoring those. One of the process measures that we've introduced are learning walks. And then lastly, our outcome measure would be the A reading screens data. Again, this breaks it down a little bit further, that with some additional strategies. So the first box with PLTs, standards-based instruction and grading, our ongoing data digs, and the equity transformation cycle are really strategies that get at that first part of the priority, high-quality core instruction. This is what all students in the system receive. The second box are Minnesota multi-tiered systems of support site leadership teams, the high-leverage moves or the practices that they use in their meetings, and then our interventions get at the second part of the priority. It's interventions across the system. So those are the strategies that we're monitoring along the way. And then we have our process measures. So learning walks and progress monitoring on classroom-based measures are in Indigo. So those are measures that we have not yet introduced as process measures. They're measures we've kept track of. This year was our first year at learning walks. So 24-25, we did learning walks. We're really looking at tonight at 23-24 data. So I think that's, we had to keep reminding ourselves of that as we went through the process. That we had these great learning walks this year, and I can't wait to talk about them and share all the cool things that we've seen and learned as a result of that. And we also continue to monitor participation in professional learning. We believe that professional learning for teachers is one of the highest levers to move and change teacher practice and student outcomes. Our outcome measures, we have typical growth for FastBridge. That's the type of growth we want to see from core instruction. And then aggressive growth. We want to see aggressive growth for students who are receiving intervention services. And then also our culture of achievement scale from our family stakeholder survey. So just a little bit about typical growth is the amount of progress we would expect a student to make in a year based on how students across the country usually grow. It's like staying on track with the average student. Half of students grow more than this and half grow less than this. And we'll talk a little bit more, Dr. Watkins will talk about that in a couple minutes. First, I want to make sure that we all have a common language and what we're looking at. A reading is our universal screener. It's given to students 3 times a year in grades this year 2 through 10, or 23-24, 2 through 10, 25-26, 2 through 12 will take this test. And it produces 2 different types of data. One of the types of data it produces is risk levels. So each student has 4 different is assigned based off of their score a risk level. Low risk, very low risk, some risk, and high risk. Those risk levels correlate to proficiency on the MCA, and they have a really strong correlation. The other thing that these results are used for is a data point that intervention teachers use and tag teachers use to either get more services for students. We're not going to look at risk levels today, and we're not going to look at MCAs today. MCAs are the proficiency on state standardized tests. We're going to focus on growth measures, and it monitors how student learning changes between 2 points in time. So in this case, we're going to be looking at fall to spring data. And so Dr. Watkins, who's a coordinator in the Data and Assessment Department, will talk us through our 23-24 data.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. So the metric that we're going to look at here first is the A reading typical growth. And so we'll be looking at the percentage of students making typical growth from fall to spring. And so when we talk about growth by START score, we're looking at the growth that students make relative to other students who started at the same point. So during the 23-24 school year, 33% of students achieved typical growth by START score. And this was a 2% decrease from the 22-23 school year. So that's what we're seeing on that slide there. This one, the line graph shows the last 3 years of the A reading growth by START score with the same cut point of typical growth, so 50th percentile or better. And the chart shows that during the 21-22 school year, all grades saw the highest rate of making typical growth. Each grade has trended downward since then. And 23-24 is the first year all of grade 10 was assessed, which is why 21, 22, and 23 are blank for grade 10. So you just see that one yellow bar there. This slide continues to show typical growth by START score, disaggregated by race and ethnicity, and it shows the trends from the past 3 years. Results from the 23-24 school year showed multiracial students making typical growth at the highest rates, 37%, which was also 1% higher than the school's percentage from the previous year. There's been a decrease between years among all other student groups. Second metric used within this indicator is the percentage of students making aggressive growth as measured by fall to spring growth by START score. So for aggressive growth, we're now talking about 75th percentile. So nationally, that'd be only 25% of students that would achieve that. During the 23-24 school year, 12% of OSCO students made aggressive growth from fall to spring. The next chart shows the variation by race and ethnicity over the 3 years. In 23-24, multiracial students made the highest rate of aggressive growth at 15%, followed by white students at 13%. Multiracial students' rate of aggressive growth increased from the 22-23 school year, while most of the other groups remained stable. And here we're going to transition to a different indicator. Now we're going to look at the Family Stakeholder Survey, and specifically the Culture of Achievement Scale. This survey was conducted in the spring of 23-24. A scientific sample of families with children enrolled in the district was used, and 1,339 families responded. The scale is based on the following 6 questions. Staff effectively communicate with my scholar. Staff know my scholar's interests. Staff address the needs, that is behavior, special education, language, social, emotional of my scholar. My scholar's been able to use their strengths. Staff believe my scholar can succeed, and staff provide an appropriate level of challenge for my scholar. The survey items with the highest rate of positive responses were staff believe my scholar can succeed at 89%, and staff effectively communicate with my scholar at 85%. This slide shows the rates of positive responses across race and ethnicity groups for the past 2 administrations. Families of Black and multiracial students had the highest rates of positive responses at 83% and 81% respectively in the most recent survey administration. And across survey years, multiracial families' ratings increased by 10% and Black families' positive ratings increased by 5%. And this slide shows the percent positive for families of scholars who receive free or reduced price meals, or FRL, on this chart. English learner or multilingual services, or EL, on this chart, and special education services, or SPED, on this chart. Of the families with the scholars receiving services, those receiving EL services had the highest rate at 86%, which increased from 84% in the previous survey investigation. The next slide shows the rates of most positive responses on the same survey by grade range. And families of early childhood, or EC scholars, had the highest rates of positive responses at 92% in the most recent survey year. This was followed by families of elementary school scholars at 87%. And I will pass it to Dr. Walker.
Thank you, Dr. Watkins. As you heard, we're going to step into Strategic Direction E, and as Dr. Bass stated earlier, we have done a reframing of Strategic Direction E. The reason why we reframed is to operate as a continuous improvement magnifier. You may be asking yourself, why is that? Well, the reason why is because to truly create equitable systems, we must first interrogate and eliminate ineffective procedures and that reinforce inequities. This is why we will center the two priorities, the highest priorities of eliminating ineffective procedures and focused priority of exploring the cycles and processes for continuous improvement, and then identify and improve ineffective procedures. So therefore, when we think about this magnifier, right, it makes me think about these two critical questions, because in order for us to have this continuous improvement, we have to be honest with ourselves, right? We have to be honest with ourselves. And these questions that comes up for me are our systems truly meeting the needs of each of our scholars? And then the second question is, are we willing to change when they are not? It's very important, right, that we have to be willing to do. And so I ask myself, as a director of educational equity, I often ask myself questions. As you will get to know me, I'm asking all these questions, and so they just show up in my mind. And so I'm wondering, do our cycles center those in our system who are the farthest from justice, and then who have also been the most marginalized and minoritized in our systems? I ask this question because if we're not doing that, what does that say about our commitment to our mission and vision, which is really centered around equity? And so this magnifier is not just like a metaphor, but it's really a call to action to make what is invisible visible, right? We have to make what's invisible visible. And it's really important to understand that these are not really like technical questions that we're asking ourselves, but really moral questions that we're asking ourselves. What's the moral imperative here that we are faced with when we're thinking about our scholars that we're trying to impact positively? So as we think about that, I'm going to pass over to Sunny to give us a real-life example of how we are doing this in action.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Walker. I'm excited to share with you some information about how the Student Services Department is connected to our Strategic Direction E. As Dr. Walker so eloquently stated, we must interrogate and eliminate ineffective procedures that reinforce inequities. In the area of special education, we are focused on eliminating ineffective staff procedures that negatively impact the ability for staff to provide direct instruction, supports, and services to our students. In the summer of 2023, the Center for Applied Research and Educational Improvement, CARE, out of the University of Minnesota, completed a program audit, and one of their recommendations was that we address the due process or paperwork concerns of our staff, and that should have a direct correlation on the outcomes for our special education students. And that obviously aligns very naturally with our Strategic Direction E. So we went to work on that. We developed a due process task force to come up with strategies that we're going to be discussing in the next few slides. Specifically, we honed in on production of special education evaluations, which I will elaborate on in the upcoming slides. Our measures for Strategic Direction E include a staff survey as a process measure, and progress reports and evaluation bypass procedures as outcome measures. The staff survey is actually a future metric. We intend to gather data that measures the connection between workload reduction and student outcomes, or the ratings that they receive on their progress reports. So how can we ensure that those two things are connected, that we're getting the data that we're hoping to collect? But first we're going to take a closer look at the evaluation bypass procedures. And as we get into that, I'll just share a little bit of information with you about what evaluation is in special education. So when a student is first evaluated for services, that's called an initial evaluation. All subsequent evaluations are referred to as re-evaluations. Up until the fall of 2022, Minnesota required that students be reevaluated every 3 years to determine if they still had a need and still needed special education services. In the fall of 2022, Minnesota changed that rule and gave districts the opportunity to make individualized choices for each student as to whether or not they needed another evaluation. And so this opened the doors and gave us an opportunity to really address how we were evaluating students and why. And we have since reduced the amount of special education re-evaluations that we do in this district through a bypass process. So we have criteria that our school psychologists use to determine when a re-evaluation may be unnecessary, and then talk that through with families and other team members to determine next steps. I do want to note that this isn't just about paperwork reduction. Special education reevaluations, when we do them and they're not necessary, are not great for kids and families. So we're pulling kiddos that are already oftentimes behind, out of class to complete assessments to give us data that we don't need because we already have it. And we're requiring families to come in 2 extra times during the year for meetings and provide us information through phone interviews, through rating scales, checklists, so it's cumbersome. So first and foremost, it is about the students and the families. And the additional benefit is the workload reduction. During the 2023-24 school year, we bypassed 196 evaluations. That was about 5.85% of our total special education count. And we're looking to be in that vision range of about 9 to 10%. And I know we just reported on last year, but I already know what we did this year, so we're moving in a good direction. We also want to cap at about that 10%. Because there are a number of reevaluations that are good for us to do because we need new data, because the student has regressed or made growth. So we're not trying to get to 100%. We're trying to hit that sweet spot. Okay, so I had mentioned on a previous slide that we're going to be using a staff survey as a process measure. If you think of that in relation to evaluation reduction, what I envision is that we're asking staff, based on the number of evaluations that you didn't do this year because of this process, how much time were you able to give back to students? How much additional time were you able to spend with students? Were you able to make your group sizes smaller? Were you able to do more observations? And so collecting some of that anecdotal information through staff survey. Another metric on this slide you'll see is progress reporting. On the next few slides we'll be reviewing progress reporting data, but I'd like to give you again some contextual information about progress reports. They're required for students on IEPs. We're required to provide written progress as many times per year as students receive report cards. So in this district, it's about 3 times per year, depending on the school. And students can obtain rankings between 1 and 5 on every goal on their IEP. So some students just have 1 goal that they're working on, others have up to 8, and anywhere in between. 1 and 2 are thumbs up, you're making great progress. 3 and 5 are, I don't want to say thumbs down, that doesn't sound nice, but we need to be working harder, we're not quite getting there. And 4 just means that hasn't been addressed yet because we have a full year to assist a student in making progress. So sometimes services come up in one trimester but not another. And so when we review this data, we see that 88% of our students at the end of Tri 2 of last year had progress marks of 1 or 2. So they were 88% of our goals, were this 1 and 2 mark. And we're looking to move in the direction, hopefully in that 95% range. On the next few slides, I have additional data disaggregated by a variety of factors. The one unique thing about this data set is it's not based by student, but essentially based by goal. Since students each have many have multiple goals, and they each have different rankings or ratings, and the numbers don't necessarily go in logical order. So it's about the number of goals, not the number of students. So the first slide has progress reports based on the students' language status. Our multilingual learners are in yellow, and our non-EL students are in blue. So this was a data set that isn't typical of other data sets that we see for our EL learners, and so it's wonderful to see our EL learners kind of setting the bar and making progress on those goals. The next data set shows broken out by gender. And we have our female students, our goals for our female students, slightly higher progress than for male students, and finally broken out by race. And you can see that goals for our American Indian and Native Hawaiian students, Asian students, Hispanic students, white students are all above baseline average, while goals for our Black and multiracial students are below that baseline number of 88%. So in summary, if you recall, Strategic Direction E has us eliminating ineffective procedures to reduce inequities. And in the case of special education, those inequities exist when our staff are so overworked that they can't provide high quality services to our students. So we're working to reduce that workload to have positive outcomes on our progress reports. Thank you.
So like our session in May, we brought back the pause and process slide so that we're not just going to keep dumping data and more information at you, so we can kind of digest and talk through and look for that alignment for these for the first half or the first part of our presentation this evening. And then we also are curious about the continuous improvement magnifier. Do you feel like this is that this has continued to reflect the purpose of Strategic Direction E? And if we've lost anything, what do you feel like we've lost? Or if we've gained something, what do you feel like we've gained? So we're really looking forward to your feedback on that as well. So like we phased this out last time, we gave you some individual think time. So there's some Post-it notes that are at your stations or at your seats. So if you want to take those and jot down your thoughts or ideas either related to the questions or other feedback that you want to provide us, and then we'll split up into those same groups of 3 that we did last time so that you all can have that discussion time that really helps you make even more meaning and sense out of the data and maybe some of the questions that you have before they come out to us. So I can tee us up with a timer here for 3 to 5 initial minutes for us to have think time, or do you?
Should we ask if there's any clarifying questions before we discuss?
There's a lot of information that came this way.
Sure.
Yeah.
I just have a question. Is A reading the same as Fastbridge, or are those two different?
Fastbridge is the company, if you will, that runs
Okay.
has that.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
It's the brand name, I should say.
Good job, Sarah.
Okay. Let's make sure.
On the goal setting, I had a question on how are those goals set? Like, are they intended to be sort of like that stretch but achievable? So the intention is that the students can achieve them? Or are they some type of other objective measure where there might, it might not be as individualized?
Specific to the special education?
Yeah, to the special education goal setting.
Yeah, so for the evaluation bypassed, I used information that I got from our regional directors and created a baseline out of that data to where we fall. And for the progress reporting, we used our current, where we're at, as our middle metric.
Yeah, so my question is, for the progress reporting, you said they set goals, and then you're measuring how many goals they achieve. So like the goals themselves, are they like goals that are, you know, kind of the SMART goal, or like the stretch but achievable, so that we would expect students to be able to achieve them? Or are they kind of arbitrary?
They're all written to be achieved within 1 calendar year's time.
Okay, for that student, that is
Yes.
achievable by that student?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And they are SMART goals?
Yes.
Okay.
And it is for the end of the year. And so if they're making this that's progress toward the goal after trimester 2.
Yes.
We're not taking the measure at the end of the year, we're taking it after trimester 2.
Yes.
Thank you.
I had the same question. I was questioning the subjectivity of that measurement. And so, like, if they are SMART goals, then I think that sort of answers the question. But I think there's also the pending question of, can two different staff members have two different measurements for that same goal? And to me, if that's the case, then I question that measurement, but I can
Do they
write that down.
Yeah, so, I mean, we focus on database, collecting specific data for the goals. And you have to write within the IEP how and what type of data is gonna be collected to measure that goal. And then there's a certain kind of formula in Minnesota where, everything that needs to be included in a goal. So the conditions, baseline, outcome data, and there's then objectives and benchmarks as well. So in a system this big, I can't promise that everyone's exactly on par with everything that they're inputting, but we try to have systems in place.
So between the protocols that are there to ensure the same type of elements are embedded in every goal that's being set, that's our best chance at reducing variability across sites. But as you said, as a district as large as ours, just to say there's no variability wouldn't be truthful.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
I'm just curious at all, and I know it's the board, but do you also take in attendance? Because if not, you're not comparing. You could be comparing, saying, these many kids babies made progress, but there was someone that was at school less than 50% of the time. That impacts what happens too. So I'm just curious.
I think that's a great consideration on all of our metrics around achievement, like the underpinning of attendance and how that's going to impact every measure, right? So I feel like that's just almost an underlying data point that we need to understand results through.
And then for a reading, going back to Sarah's start, what's the goal on that one? Can you clarify that for me?
Yep. The goal for typical growth.
Mm-hmm.
So that'd be 50%. So it'd be making the same amount of growth that is typical nationally for students that are at the same starting point.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
So I actually have a question about this and this is a personal question, I guess, but I'm curious how it impacts our scores across the board. If we have higher learners that score high in the fall and then don't have growth at all in the spring, how does that impact how we monitor that growth? Or how does that impact
No, I
our
think it's
scores?
a great question. It is a great question. And it's something that we've been, I'd say, monitoring not just with FastBridge, with A reading and A math, but also as we think about the MCA, the goals that we set for that as well. So I think that's something that we're exploring. We've done a lot of checking the norming studies to see what it means to have a goal for, by starting score versus a growth by all. That's another option, is to just say everybody should make this same rate that is set for the whole grade level. You know what I mean? So there's pros and cons of those two things. But it's not always the case that the kids who start out lower make more growth nationally. It maybe used to be the case, but it is no longer that case in all cases. So there are these balances that come into it. And it does become kind of a technical conversation pretty quickly, but it's a great question. And so, yeah, if we wanted to explore that further, we certainly could. We
Yeah,
look
and
at
I think
or
it's more, and it falls under the rigor of are we measuring those higher
Yes.
scoring students and tracking how they're doing as well?
Yeah.
We're seeing movement, just understanding their trends as well.
Yeah. I still think that these goals that we have for typical growth and for aggressive growth, at least from my perspective, they're still pretty rigorous for us right now.
Okay.
We're a ways, from hitting that
For
that
all
goal.
students, though?
Just because we're at 33%, right, or 32%, and nationally it'd be 50%. So that tells us we have some more to, from that.
Right, but for your students that, I'm just brainstorming, just don't see the superintendent role. But students that, what Director Foster is saying, that's already coming in quite high, then they will never have aggressive growth.
Correct. So we're
right?
really looking at aggressive growth for our students who are receiving intervention services.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're looking,
Okay.
so one of the other things we do is we also
Okay.
look at growth and proficiency and how those are combined. So do we have a student who is not growing but is proficient, and what does that look like? Or a student who's really high, has really high growth but isn't proficient. So we have, those are the conversations that our professional learning teams are having at sites about that. Yeah.
And when we think about core instruction, what every child has access to, what we're trying to grow is the percentage of students in their core classroom teacher, in their third grade teacher's classroom, that the majority of those students have received typical growth, right? And if those students are far away from meeting proficiency, we want to see aggressive growth. We want to make sure that they're accessing intervention and making aggressive growth. So it's not a perfect measure, right? But it allows us to see, right, how are we doing with typical growth?
But
Yeah.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, we're good.
It's Director Foster's fault, but if there's, if you do have our babies at the top level, are we literally looking at those kids and saying if they're growing, if they're stuck, if they're lowering, are we literally just looking at that group, not anybody else, but that group to see if we're having growth
The idea with
or
growth by-
decline?
Yeah, the idea with growth by starting score is you
Yeah.
could make high growth or low growth at anywhere.
Yeah.
in-
I
in
think
the
that
whole
might
range.
be more my question is,
Yeah.
are we analyzing those kids at the
Yeah,
top?
Yeah.
they
so
count for this.
Our tag teachers are absolutely looking at that.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
absolutely.
So they count separate from intervention and middle, or we just group together, or?
So they would see so if I'm a teacher, right? I would
Yeah,
see
yeah,
my
yeah,
whole
yeah.
class, and I would see each student's score, and then I wouldn't see any growth in the fall, right? Because that's our baseline.
Right,
I would look at it in the winter and say, oh, Jill Kind has 67% growth. Dr. Walker has 98% growth. Dr. Bass has 75% growth, and we would say, okay, Dr. Walker, let's have our tag teachers look at how did he do last year? Is this a new thing for Dr. Walker, or is this a consistent performance? Jill Kind, Jill Kind needs to be an intervention. We need to make sure that she's going to make that aggressive growth because she needs to do some.
So we're looking at every individual
Absolutely. So
student.
that's
Okay.
the professional learning teams, our instructional coaches, our staff development assessment specialists, and our MNT, or Minnesota MTSS site leadership teams are looking at that. That's sort of one of their charges is to make sure that each student, somebody has eyes on them.
Thank you.
And then if at one point like an intervention isn't working,
Yes.
there's no progress, then what?
Yep, so each site has a student assistance team, a student intervention team, a problem solving team. They have lots of different names
Yeah, they-
where that student would come and the team would talk about, so like on the team would be an interventionist, a counselor, a social worker, a site principal or assistant principal, and they'd say, okay, was the intervention done with fidelity would be the first question, right? So I liken it to a doctor. Are we following the treatment plan? Okay, yes we are. So then do we need to increase the dosage? Do they need to do it more? Or is it the actual intervention that needs to be changed? So they're going to go through a whole process to figure out sort of like that root cause analysis of why isn't it working? What's the next best step for this student?
Okay, so one more question with that. So then when a decision like that's made, whatever level, if it's
Yep.
high achieve, kids that do really well, kids that are intervention, who talks to parents about this? Like, is it the teacher? Is it like, how do parents know how to even support
Yeah, great question.
any of this?
So that's one of the things that we are working on to systematize, is so that it is there's a point person at each school that we can say, it is the counselor at every site who runs the SIT team who's going to do the communicating, or it's the principal or whoever. So right now it varies between sites. So it might be the intervention teacher, it might be a Title I teacher, could be the interventionist. So we're working on improving that.
So if it's a K-5, is not the classroom teacher this year, is it at conferences or anything?
They might share it at conferences if it's a Tier 1, but if it's a Tier 2 intervention, it
I
could
got
be
you.
our intervention teacher who's
Okay.
sharing it. Great question.
So I think this is a really good discussion that kind of comes full circle to this is under continuous improvement. So that's not to say that we're not measuring and making sure all students are continuing to achieve growth, but for this measure, we're focusing on the intervention, and this is the metric for growth for this specific segment because it's continuous improvement.
Yep.
So I think that's where like sometimes like as we're interpreting this, I think that's what we gotta kind of keep our eye on is what's the specific strategy and the
Yes.
measure for that strategy, it does not mean that we're not doing other things.
Correct.
Yeah, this
Just
is
get
the,
curious,
yeah,
you
this
know?
is
Yeah.
the straightest alignment,
Yeah.
right, to that priority, strategy, and measure. Is that good?
Yeah, are we still going to breakout?
Do we just have a breakout group?
Just have a breakout group? What do you want them to do, Dr. Bass?
I think it's your call. We can save it for the end if you're feeling like you've got your initial.
Well, maybe we just have large group conversation.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's kind of
Just
going
keep
well
going.
right now.
Yeah.
So, but I would just say to answer, where any more of the question is in there?
They're up here, they're on the monitors.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
So I love this page, maybe that's helpful, like I feel like this is the best page for us to look at to answer the question, because it's got the priority, the expected outcome, the strategy, and then the measures, so this is what we're reflecting on, right?
What page is that?
What page is that?
This doesn't have a page number on it. System strategy snapshot. It looks like this.
It's in the beginning of the packet, at the beginning of the slide packet.
Oh.
Slide.
Yes. 12?
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Gotcha. Thank you.
One of the questions that I had on measures is the family stakeholder survey. So I think there's been data that shows the highest engagement from families is at the elementary level. And we notice some of the percentages decrease as years go on. And so one of the questions that I'm wondering is, one, are we measuring family burnout? And if that is the case, the families are getting burned out as their kids are progressing through our schools, is that a reliable measurement for some of these vision cards, particularly for middle school and high school?
Tom, in our scientific sample, do we make sure that we have a proportionate representation of middle school families, high school families as well?
Yes.
Do you want to say more about that?
I'm wondering if the burnout that you're thinking of is like over-surveying, like they've received too many surveys, or is it that they're kind of reaching a point where it's, I guess I just am trying to understand exactly what you're after. Like, do you think there would be a solution in terms of addressing that burnout? Like,
I look at a question, because we have family stakeholder questions, I think, on a lot of the vision cards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like one of the questions being, staff know my scholar's interests. If families are less engaged, or their students are getting older, how can you accurately answer that question? So like, it's those types of questions that I'm wondering about.
All right, yeah. So are they appropriate for that grade range?
Mhm.
That's kind of what you're at. Okay.
Yeah, and so this will kind of speak back to, like, as we continue to refine processes, is the family stakeholder survey still measuring what we want it to measure, and should it be different by grade level, considering that they have different needs at different grade level?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Well, and different
Okay.
levels of independence.
Mhm.
That's what came to mind for me.
Mhm.
And for the stakeholder survey, that was one of the comments I had as well. I think the staff provide an appropriate level of challenge for my scholar, and what was the other one? Addressing the needs. Those were the two most relevant questions in my mind. And then the others kind of fell far below in answering the question of what we're asking. And so just even highlighting, prioritizing some of those questions and
Can you just list the
oh, sorry,
the
yeah.
most relevant again?
Staff provide an appropriate level of challenge for my scholar, and staff address the needs of my scholar.
Okay, thank you.
Just the most directly relevant, it seemed. And if you have more insight behind why the other questions were relevant, I'd totally be open to hearing that too.
So there's like dual things we're looking for, right? So so if the treatment is about what the educator moves are, right, then what should be the impact of those educator moves? right? And so there's the performance we'd like to see from our scholars, right? Typical growth, aggressive growth. And then there's the, what are the things that are harder to measure, which is how much confidence, courage, and competence are they feeling, right? In terms of agency and efficacy. Because that also, right, is a really critical variable for our scholars, is how confident, how much agency, and how strong do they feel advocating for themselves? Do they know what their strengths are? Do they, like, so I think as we look at, to your point, Chair Prince, about the validity and reliability of all of the items, or the relatability of, or the relevance of all of them, I think we have room for refinement. And we are looking at Avid's student agency survey. They have one at elementary, middle, and high school, and we are excited to review that and see which of those items or which of those scales might be important, like really good for us to bring over to our stakeholder survey.
Yeah.
So,
I also wonder, is it more important to measure students' response than parents' response as they get older? Like when they're young, they're maybe less reliable how they self-report versus high school.
And like my middle schooler would be able to respond to, staff believe my scholar can succeed, and I probably wouldn't be able to gauge that
Exactly.
as a parent.
But this is exactly the right conversation to have, but tying it all together.
any feedback on the reframing of strategic direction E as a continuous improvement magnifier? Do you like that? Is it?
I like it for me because it gives something tangible to something that has felt intangible. Like when we're talking about equity and disparities, it's always felt like language that's out here, and this, like the way that it was described at the beginning from Dr. Walker, like made it really clear. Like what are we looking for, or what are we trying to measure with that? And I also think that like when we think about equity and disparities, that should underpin everything and not necessarily be just in one strategy. But to me, like the continuous improvement really I think does get at that because of the way that it was described. Like it actually gives us a place to say what's working and what do we need to change for the outcome that we're trying to achieve. But other thoughts?
I love that it started with data and it ended with data, and I thought you guys did a fabulous job framing that. And just the focus on continuous improvement. I mean, I feel like that's one of the key indicators of success, is how we can integrate that into everything we do just as humans. So that was really exciting to hear both of you present, so thank you for that.
And I just have a question back to the decrease in the A reading typical growth. Have we identified, like, how are we analyzing what specifics might have, decrease?
So I just
like,
would
what
keep
is that process, or just kind of an overview?
Yeah, I have to keep reframing it in my mind because this is 23, 24, and we had a lot happening there. We had a pilot happening with some of all of our elementary teachers were either piloting or teaching old curriculum in the science of reading. We were learning about it, and so letters training. We had half of our elementary staff going through letters training. So there was a lot happening in 23, 24 that led to these disappointing results. I think we're not happy with that, and I think one of the things that we've seen this year is 24, 25, we have more teachers engaging in letters training or another training called OLA or CORE, and what we're hearing from them is after this year of implementing and doing this training, they're having these light bulb moments that are really exciting. So we're having those conversations with leaders and with teachers about, okay, now that you have this learning, what does this look like in the classroom? So how do we get our staff development assessment specialists into the classroom and say, let me show you how to do this? So we're saying, yep, this is our data, and now we're moving forward because we've changed curriculum since 23, 24. I mean, we've adopted
This
two.
is year one.
Yeah, this is year one of 2 new curriculums that were very intentionally focused on the areas that we knew we were weak in earlier. Explicit instruction and phonics instruction. So I think that is some of the things. So yes, and it's sort of that continuous improvement.
Is this where, Dr. Kine, you're going to talk about learning walks, or is that still coming?
So learning walks are 24, 25, and we did those specifically focused on explicit instruction in elementary. And every elementary teacher had 2 learning walks this year.
Can you explain what that looks
A
like?
learning
Sounds
walk,
like?
yep. So we go in, there's a form that's a checklist, and it's in duplicate. And so as a nerdy teacher, I love duplicate and triplicate forms. But so we would look for, there are 16 elements of explicit instruction, and we would spend 7 minutes in the classroom. Not 5, not 4, 7 minutes, and we would look for each of these elements. If we saw it, it was a checkbox. If we didn't see it, it was blank. We would tear the top sheet off, leave it with the teacher so they knew what we saw, and then we would take the bottom sheet back and enter it into our fabulous data system. And then teachers had the opportunity to say, you know what, I think you actually missed this. It also gave us an opportunity to see, oh, Jill Kine's not doing this. That's not okay, right? We have a policy, so the expectation that teachers use our guaranteed and viable district curriculum. So that was an opportunity to have conversations with leaders about, hey, you should go check on Jill Kine and see what's going on. What we know is that there were very few teachers who weren't using the curriculum. What we also observed in the spring was the growth in confidence of the classroom teacher in using the routines and structures of the curriculum. And that's always the hardest, right? Because your muscle memory wants to, when it's uncomfortable, wants to default back to the way you've always done it. And our teachers weren't defaulting back. They were embracing the challenges and getting into that. So every elementary teacher had 2 of those this year. We want to do 2 more next year. And just keep really growing, helping teachers grow that memory. And provide feedback, right? Because that in-the-moment feedback of, oh, I think you did see this. Maybe I don't understand what this looks like. So how do we use this data to inform our professional learning at the system level and with principals at sites? Because we do share the data with the principal.
So if I could, in some of the conversations that we've had, that first one going into verify that the over $1 million in curriculum materials that we just invested in, that they're being used. So we verified the use of the materials. And then secondly, making sure that the explicit instruction, those 16 moves that we want to be able to see, going in and providing teachers feedback on that. Because first is, are you using the materials? And then secondly, are you also centering the pedagogy and the instruction that we want you to be using in the classroom with the scholars with the materials? So these are outstanding that we're able to collect that for year 1 and then build on that for next year.
And the whole point of the learning walks as well was to support the staff and see if there's a need that they need or more training in something.
And focus our ongoing professional learning.
Absolutely. And we changed our January system monthly at elementary because of what we were seeing in learning walks. We felt that there needed to be a conversation vertically about what happens. Here's how I use this vocabulary routine in kindergarten. How does that grow in 1st grade, in 2nd grade? And teachers gave us really positive feedback at the team.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, I agree with what everyone's saying. I mean, I think for me, like when I think about like kind of these interventions or just like the math or reading, there's this component that I feel like another like kind of close a loop with, and that's like family and caregiver engagement, because I know like my son, for example, had interventions, but like what I would get is a letter, and I would be like, I work full time, I have I have other kids, and so I'm like trying to just read the letter and like have 0% training, in any of it. And I think sometimes our families, like, I think our schools, we can only do so much, and I think that families are kind of thirsty to know, like, what else can I do to be supportive? Like, do I need to go to Huntington? Do I need to go, or do I just need to know a little bit more about the intervention or the, whatever is being taught right now? Because I think that that's just like another kind of huge component that I know there's varying degrees of who, but I do think families and caregivers would like to know a little bit more, and just as much as teachers get like trainings and stuff, I think that'd be really helpful.
I actually had a conversation today with Vanessa Gill, our coordinator of family and community engagement, about exactly that. And so trying to find a time this summer where we could get together to say, okay, what is our plan for, particularly around literacy, because there's more requirements with the READ Act, the MDE, about communication with families. But it's all, like you said, very education jargon. And so how do we make it an active sort of process and not this, you get this letter or this phone call or this message. So that's on our to be done list.
So having had kids on IEP before, and then kind of thinking about Kelsey's comment there is, in addition to school, I know a lot of, like, we were in the position to do all kinds of stuff after school too. So is there some kind of understanding of how much on top of school that the kids are getting versus kids that aren't able to get that additional?
It's a great question.
Okay.
So how do we make that visible in the results?
Yeah, because if there's, because we're gonna have parents that have the facilities to do whatever it takes, right, above and beyond what the schools have to offer, and then the communities that are not gonna be able to do that, so.
Thank you. Are we good to continue with the second half of the presentation?
Good, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
So the focus priority in strategic direction B is to improve pathways for college and career readiness to unleash student agency. The expected outcome is that TAG participation, accelerated course enrollment, and 12 by 12 enrollment mirror our district demographics. So we have two strategies. That's AVID, advanced via individual determination, and advisory. Process measure is the to be developed student agency survey, and then our outcome measure is the achievement index. So again, here are some more details on our strategies. We have a middle school math acceleration that we'll look at, and then our advisory program improvement process. We're spending a lot of time looking at advisory 612 that each and every student has access to during their career here. And how does that align with AVID? How do we make sure that it is the guaranteed and viable learning that we want for each and every one of our scholars? Our process measures, student agency survey scale, to be developed, it's an indigo, and then our outcome measures are the achievement index, our 12 by 12, and graduation and continuation rates. So, the achievement index metric consists of 4 measures. Students earning at least one semester or trimester of credit in the following courses. Post-secondary enrollments, where students go to the college. Concurrent enrollments, where students take the college course with our teachers on our campuses. Articulated courses, where students take the course with our teachers, but have to go to the college to get the credit. AP courses, IB courses, and or HP high performance courses. Students earning professional certificates in either CPR, first aid, EMT, or EMR. Completing an internship, apprenticeship, or related experience, and students earning a Minnesota bilingual seal. In this metric, each student was counted one time, regardless of how many of these 4 items they achieved. A total of 63% of all students enrolled in our high schools during the 23-24 year have achieved at least one of these 4 measures of the index, an increase of 1% since 22-23. This metric continues to be in the baseline range, but is trending positively. These particular measures were chosen as they are inclusive of a variety of pathways for students to show college and career readiness.
This slide shows the achievement index data broken down by race and ethnicity. The data show that the groups with the highest rate of achievement in the 23-24 school year were students identifying as white at 71%, and students identifying as Asian, so that was 69%. The largest increase between years was among American Indian and Hawaiian Pacific Islander students at 10%, followed by Asian students who achieved a 4% increase. In this chart, the achievement index data were disaggregated by service group. And among students receiving services, those receiving free or reduced price meals had the highest rate of achievement at 59%. When looking at rates by gender, students identifying as female were at 69%, and that was 10% higher than for male students.
The 12 by 12 metric shows the percent of students who are on track to or have earned 12 credits that could lead to college credit by the time they graduate. Courses that could lead to student earning college credit include PSEO, concurrent enrollment, articulated, AP, and IB courses. To be considered on track in this metric, students in grades 9 must have earned 3 or more credits, students in grade 10, 6 or more credits, grade 11, 9 or more, and grade 12 earned 12 or more credits, and any of the aforementioned courses. A total of 12% of students were either on track to have earned 12 credits by the end of their 12th grade year, which is approximately 2.5% increase from the 22-23 school year. This metric moved to the baseline range. This graph shows the 12 by 12 metric disaggregated by race and ethnicity. The student groups that had the highest rates of being on track for or meeting the requirements of this metric were students who identify as white, 18%, and multiracial, 15%, followed closely by Asian students at 14%. The largest increase between years was seen among white students with an increase of 7% and multiracial students with an increase of 5%. This metric was also disaggregated by service group and gender. Students who identify as female achieved the 12 by 12 at a rate higher than the overall average of 14%. Students receiving free or reduced price meals had the highest rate of achieving the 12 by 12 of all service groups at 8%. And Dr. Watkins is going to talk about our graduation and continuation rates.
Our graduation and continuation rates are the percentage of students in each class who either graduated in 4 years or continued on for a 5th year with multilingual or special education support. Results for all of the groups used in this indicator are in the monitoring report. Here we're only seeing results for state racial groups, and most have achieved the 80% benchmark in most of these years. By 2024, each of our racial groups was either above 90% or has improved since 2021. However, graduation and continuation rates for our American Indian and Hispanic students have been below the benchmark for most of the past 4 years. I'll turn it back to Dr. Walker.
Thank you, Dr. Watkins. Again, here's a magnifier, and again, it's seeking to keep us honest in our commitment to continuous improvement. And the 2 questions obviously are really important and valuable. The way that I look at these questions is it's the conscience of the district. It's helping us slow down to really ask ourselves these important questions so that we can have a positive impact on our students and our scholars and families, right? So how do we make sure that we're asking those questions, being very intentional so that we can get to some of these different outcomes that we want to see, right? And so when we look at the next slide, this kind of is our priority E, right? Apply evidence from multiple data sources to drive rigorous system improvements. And then the strategy that we're utilizing is equity transformation cycle, professional learning teams, program improvement process. But right now we're going to dig into the equity transformation cycle a little bit. But before we go there, I want to stop and talk about data for a second. So, since the inception of our Good Vision cards, we have shown this graphic to explain the different levels of achievement data that we present in the updates to the board, right? And so what I want to briefly go through, this is talking about the 3 different levels of data. There's satellite data, there's map data, and then there's street data. And so when we think about that, this satellite view gives us the data from a big picture, look at the full district, right? Trends and patterns. That's what the satellite data does for us. And then there's the map view, which zooms down or zooms in into the school level or even into a grade level across the system, right? And so that's what that level of data is working with. And then we have what we call the street level data, which you all are kind of been addressing a little bit in the earlier conversation that you're having, talking about what are the parents saying, what are the students getting at, right? That's getting those voices of our students and families right at the entrance of how are you experiencing our system, right? And this is where the equity work lives, right? This is where the equity work lives, where we can get day-to-day impact from our students and families based on conversations and how we approach them in that work. And so that's what we want to make sure that we're doing in this work, right? So we want to impact our scholars in a positive way, and these questions that we are asking can get to meaningful change. And so when we think about this, right, in 2023, before I was with the system, there was an introduction of street data and the work that Shane, Saphir, and Jamila Dugan had done. And so we made sure that all of our district leaders had a really good understanding and concept of what the knowledge around street data were. And then this year, in 24-25, we dug into the equity transformation cycle. However, we wanted to make sure that we were very intentional and we slowed down about what is this equity transformation cycle is about so that we can really interrupt these ineffective ways that we use and view data, right? Interrupting the mindsets and replacing it with curiosity for how we can establish the conditions for our equity teams. And so each school, based on their data digs, crafted an equity challenge, which is the first step in starting the process of equity transformation cycle. And so we'll just kind of go through the equity transformation cycle. As you see here, there's the listen, uncover, reimagine, and move. And so I'm going to share just a little bit about how I have experienced this in my past work and past experiences. And so when we think about the segment of listening, and you heard me talk about changing our mindsets and beliefs, right? Well, we have to be prepared to listen. And what I mean by that is when we go out and ask families to share with us their true experiences, we may not always hear what we want to hear. Right? We may not always hear what we want to hear. And we got to prepare ourselves to be able to receive that information. Because any sense of body language that we show, any facial expressions that we give off can change the dynamic and what we hear from those families. right? And what we don't want to do is like influence their responses. We need to hear the uncut raw truth so that we can really make some changes, right? And that's where we get to the next thing about uncovering. And so if we are really wanting to uncover that, we have to do a good job of that listening process. And so we want to slow our educators down, our leaders down, to saying, hey, let's make sure we're prepared to really do some listening, because when these students start giving us feedback, you may not like that. You may not want to hear what they have to say, especially if they're going to say it in their authentic voice, right? Because it could be a little raspy. I'll just use that term. It may be a little raspy, right? And so as we start to uncover that, then we say, oh, look at what we learned. Look at what we found out, right? Now the question is, what do we do with that information that we found out? That's the uncovering part, right? Then we got to reimagine. The reimagine part is now I got to do something different, because as the philosopher says, is that if we keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, that is the definition of insanity, right? So when we hear this information, we got to be willing to reimagine what we're going to do. We have to be willing to do that. Now, the question becomes, is the system ready and prepared for that reimagining, right? And that's where we have to really start to think about our mind frames, our mindsets, our beliefs, how we're showing up. And that's why these questions that we are entering in this strategic direction E is really instrumental, because it helps us slow down. It helps us pause. It helps us really think through of where we're at, where we want to go, how do we get there, how are we listening to these real voices. And then at the end, we got to move, right? And sometimes the movement is where the rubber meets the road, right? Is where the rubber meets the road. And so as we think about this work, I just want to, before I pass over to Dr. Bass for the pausing process, and what I want us to be really mindful of is that this work is not about perfection. It's about progress over perfection, right? How are we getting better every single day? How are we doing the work every single minute with the students that we are coming in contact with the families that we're coming in contact with? If we can do those things, when we start to think about these equity transformation cycles that we're having our leaders go through, we can replicate this multiple times with multiple groups, with multiple marginalized and minoritized communities and populations to get some of these different changes that we want in our data. But again, you gotta first start off with being prepared to listen. I'll turn it back to that.
All right. Thank you for the energy and passion. Thank you, Dr. Walker. And thank you all. So I think we, in the conversation that we've had, I'm not sure if we can stay in a large group again, if you all are comfortable with that, to provide us again with some more feedback on when we think about how we're capturing these two big overarching questions for continuous improvement magnifier. You're still feeling like this is a strong reflection of honoring that direction, and then as we look at unleashing student agency, those measures around the achievement index, the 12 by 12, those pieces, and then the student agency survey is coming, right? That's what we're going to pilot next year and get feedback from students on next year and be able to populate that. So that kind of answers the question that we had earlier about it might be interesting to see that 6 through 12 we focus more on student responses, and K-5 we focus more on family responses. So open it up to you all.
Yeah, Dr. Walker, every time you speak, I feel like I need to say amen. I always appreciate it.
I agree. I don't know if that was a counseling session or a motivational.
I know, I was like,
So I'm curious of the questions that other school board members have. As I'm looking at this vision card and some of the data that was presented today, with the exception of like the graduation and continuation rates and then the 4-year dropout rates, which actually it says specific to special education, it feels like there's a huge chunk of our student population that's missing from this data. The front page seems like it sort of hits at one large set of students, which is focused on measuring typical and aggressive growth. And then we're looking at higher achievement on the second side, which is all of the sort of post-secondary PSEO, concurrent, AP, HP courses, etc. It seems like there's a lot of students missing, and I don't know if we can capture that through survey data, like you mentioned, is coming. But yeah, I kind of wanted a response to that. And then the second part is when I look at the achievement index, it seems like we're lumping a bunch of things into one that don't necessarily go together. Like CPR first aid doesn't equal EMT EMR certification to me. Just kind of wanted some thoughts on
Yeah.
those two things.
I can back up to that, sure. So I think there's a couple of things. One of the things about our professional certifications is right now we have the health science magnet at Osco Senior and the automotive magnet. With Building a Better Future, we are expanding our certifications that are going to be offered across the system. So really looking at that. So those numbers will include other programs at different sites. So I think that's one thing that we need to think about as well. CPR and first aid can actually, students can take that to a job and use that to get a salary advancement, things like that. So that's why that's included in that measurement. Yeah, that's a great clarification. I think the other piece is there are a large chunk of students missing in that in the 12 by 12. So really now focusing on how do we look at elementary tag participation? How do we look at that middle school math acceleration? How do we look at all of those opportunities that give students access to more rigorous coursework? And I had one more thought and it just escaped my mind.
Well, I mean, again, it's hard to like separate like my own experience with some of this with what we're talking about, but I mean, my question was going to be like with the achievement index with the 12 by 12, like I think some of it is like how are we ensuring people know to do that? Because like my daughter who's now going to junior year college, like I made her, I didn't give her an option. Like I'm like, you're taking this AP course and HP course. That's just not an option, you know. And like, but I've noticed even like with my other kids who's going into or she's going into high school. I mean, I just don't know how much parents, if you're not engaged in things, like then you don't really know. Like, yeah, you should take an HP's course, or it's not as hard as you think it is, or it's actually more conversational, you know, and it's actually like really getting you to think critically versus that. So I think that is also when you look at the number. I guess my question is like, how are we kind of amplifying it throughout the district, beyond even tag, right? Like, I mean, it's like, you know, it's kind of all throughout elementary and kind of to show that, like, and to show all of our kids that, like, or students that, yes, you can be part of this and you can, you know, achieve this even if, you know what I mean?
I think when we were, sorry, I'll let you respond, but maybe I can tag on to that. One of the things I think that we had intended when we were first setting out some of these metrics was how do we have the multiple pathways so that it's not only on like the AP or the like the other kind of the credit side. So I 100% agree, like how do people know, and then how do we treat the different pathways in a way that's individualized achievement also.
Yeah, I was just going to reference the equity transformation cycle, right, and the equity challenge that I kind of just shared. Is that as you have this data, and we ask those questions, so who do we not see in the data? So that's a question that the schools can ask themselves when they start to ask themselves, and they start to say, our indigenous males are not showing up in our 12 by 12 snapshot, right? So now, as that can be part of their equity challenge that they do, and now they do a deep dive saying, so why is this happening? So now they go through this equity cycle, they go and try to maybe listen to some of the young men who are experiencing this, see what are some of the barriers. Now they uncovered that, now they got to reimagine, so how do we be intentional about getting these students access to these courses, right? And so now that becomes part of the process, and then they have to reimagine whatever it is that they have been doing and saying, we got to change it, and now we got to move and do something different. So that can be the way that they can address some of these things that you're referencing is through that equity transformation cycle, which is why it's so important that they get the understanding of that so they can replicate that for many different situations. It doesn't have to just be one at a time. They can do 15 of these throughout the school year because there can be smaller groups who are addressing different data points that we have within our system. Does that make sense for everybody?
What would you say is the goal for this achievement index measures? Because not everybody is going to want to do an AP class.
Exactly.
Not everybody is going to want to do PSEO. For some people, it's getting a C in passing. That's their goal when they leave. So, and that's an individualized pathway, correct? So, how do we? And maybe that's the question we're all mulling is. Success looks different for each kid.
Can I share an observation? So when I've heard the conversations around this and look at this, I look at it as career and college pathway. So when you look at that first row, that's really have I participated in something that's getting me on the college pathway? The remaining 3 buckets are all about, am I participating in something that's going to lead me towards a future career? Whether that's apprenticeship, related experience, getting the bilingual seal, participating in a certification process, and as Jill mentioned, with our pathway program is going to expand all of the high schools once everything gets implemented. So it's, I think, beyond just that first,
totally.
Did I participate in those AP and honors
But it's not
courses?
going to be 100% because it won't, not everybody will be covered by these areas.
Yeah, I would, we should just call it college and career something index, because to me, there has to be other ways to measure achievement for students that this doesn't fit.
But I think this is under the college and career, so it's the right measures, it's just, it's not achievement, it's the college and career. But I do think we should challenge ourselves to say, because if we want every single student to participate in college and career, then what we're measuring, number one, the opportunities have to be that everyone should be able to be in this number. And then to the point, who's missing in the data and what do we need to do about that then?
Well, I mean, you look at the data in 12 by 12, and there's clear disparities of who's, I mean, I can tell you my daughter is the only black student in her class, in a lot of her HP classes. And I don't necessarily think that's reflective because all other black students only want to have a C. That's not, I would very much challenge that. And I think that, so I like what you were saying, Dr. Walker, around that transformation piece. I think that's really critical.
Yeah, and I wasn't commenting on
it
by a racial issue at all. I think
Yeah.
my sister didn't want to go anywhere after high school.
And
So
I'm just looking at the
so I think it's
Yeah.
more just what's reality of where our students are at, and if that's a career and college readiness index, then yes, that totally matches it, and it makes sense. Yes, I'm tracking with that portion of it, but I think it's what's the goal for that percentage? What do we want our schools to be at?
So, right, Dr. Bass calls me the 100% girl. So I would want each and every one of our students to try a rigorous course, AP, IB, concurrent enrollment, or to be in a CTE pathway or strand. So I think that could be a measurement that we add. Are they taking a strand course to explore that career opportunity, as opposed to maybe being in an official internship or taking a test to get this certification? So I want it to be 100%.
I agree.
And-
I just, go ahead. I'm sorry, Dr. K. I got to jump in here. I think we're, I'm just in process, and I'm looking at the superintendent. I think, some of this is woulda, coulda, shoulda. And then how do we create consistency in the school that we either say every child will take an IB class or every child will take an AP course, or, you know what I mean? Or even if we want them to volunteer to do that, do we in our district, do we have a process set where there's a counselor or somebody sitting down with that child? There's been many a child that go, I didn't know we had PSEO.
Yep.
Right? And that's going to show in these numbers right here.
Yep.
Right? So what is our process and procedures that, I've been saying down the road, I'm just with
Well,
you, but.
No, when we look
Yeah.
at the strategies, though, that advisory program improvement process, that is a place that we know that every middle schooler is in every day, and we can start that conversation. We actually start that conversation in elementary, so, right, we're having these strands at the high schools. How do we back that all the way down to kindergarten, right? Our CTE program person talks about how when you're in kindergarten, everyone wants to be an astronaut or, they want the big career, but there's all these little careers along the way. So how do we start exposing students to that sort of continuum of what they could do, all the way down as our little kindergartners, right? So that program improvement process to make sure that we're consistent and coherent across the system is really critical. So that's some work that's on the to be done list for 25, 26.
I want to jump in on piece. So this is really critical, the expected outcome, that first row of blue. So what we're talking about is, does the enrollment and participation in those pathways mirror the demographics of our district? Right, so that's one way of looking at it. And then I'm hearing us also engage in, and we want 95% of our scholars before they graduate participate in at least one of, I like how you frame that, Anthony, in either a college or a career pathway experience, right?
What
And at least
kind
one.
of career though? So we got our babies, because they're social media people and they're entrepreneurs and they want to open their own
Influencers, yeah.
business. That's not up there, right? So we're still kind of, I'm just brainstorming, we're still kind of
Yep.
doing 2000s when our kids are like over here, right? So it's just something to think about.
Yep.
And was the data outdated as well? Because I know Park Centers had a lot of innovative initiatives this year that might not be reflected.
23-24 data,
Yeah.
so the 24-25
Yeah.
data is not,
Yeah.
yes, that is correct.
Is a reason why I pointed that out is if there's a recommendation for us to expand this expected outcome to go beyond mirroring our district demographic data, but to say we want over 95% or we want whatever percent of our students to have taken at least one, we can certainly move in that direction. And then obviously as a system, then we have to roll that out.
Call it the Jill kind
No.
goal.
No.
100%.
100%.
I think it comes back to what is the one, right? So of the list that's there, that just hits a certain little bitty pocket of our kids, right?
When we studied, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
When I was in my first principalship at Brooklyn Center, we studied Mounds View School District at that time.
Yep.
So they were being nationally recognized for starting an early college program, and so they required all students to take at least one college level course in an area of interest that they had, and they had such a broad and comprehensive set of offerings that students found themselves represented in one of those different post-secondary opportunities. So I mean that districts are doing that. So
I think the other piece, I think the other piece is that right now every student has a personal learning plan in grades 9 through 12, and it's housed in Schoology, our learning management system. So we can't easily mine the data to find out what are those plans, who doesn't have a plan. So one of the things that we're tomorrow looking at with our counselors 612 and some other friends is a platform that would allow us to do that, to go in, students take interest surveys in there and we can see what they're interested in, so we can then create courses that they're interested in, and really I can see us evolving this metric to include some of those pieces.
Dr. House talking about.
Yep.
Yeah, so it reflects what their career interests are for the future as opposed to what they were in 2010, 5.
89.
1990s. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I really like how you frame this, and I do think it allows us to have these conversations, to say kind of dig deeper, and I think Kanye references very tangible, and so we can look at it and look where we want to go. I mean, and I just believe that I just want all of our students to have be exposed, and not limit themselves. And that does not mean an AP. I understand that, but it does mean opportunity, right? And how do we open that door? I mean, that's my passion.
I mean, Brian, I am not opposed to saying we should say yes. We want all our kids to take a college or career class. I think that is a realistic goal for a district that wants to be the stretch and achieve. I mean, I'd love to, obviously, it'd be a conversation. But I think there's areas where we can really reach for some of those goals, and I think it'd be an interesting premise to look at.
I think I'd leave it in your guys' hand to take the feedback and say, should it be exactly that, or should it be something different, but given the emerging kind of things that are in play.
I'm more saying you'd have my support in terms of the reach and stretch, yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Do you want to go to next steps? So similar to May, we'll continue to collect input and develop a new process. So we've got that stakeholder survey. What we didn't talk about is that when we deliver the staff stakeholder survey, what we're trying to integrate is some skip logic, where it populates, for example, our special ed teachers items that are specific to what Sunny spoke to earlier. So everybody wouldn't get those items, but those who are licensed special ed staff would get those items. And so if you're teaching literacy, then you would maybe have a skip logic where you're getting specific items that are loaded for literacy instruction. So that is something that we're also looking at for those surveys next year. The second one is identify the remaining major strategies. So Tanya, the one that you highlighted earlier, that's a really good way of seeing the system strategy snapshot laid all the way out. We're going to continue populating more and more of the strategies across the system, giving greater visibility on all the things that we're trying to do to reach all students. And then that last one is to continue to integrate your feedback, which was so valuable tonight. Always, but especially tonight. This is the questions that we're asking tonight aren't questions that we typically are asking at Vision Cards Update, and this is fantastic. So we'll continue to integrate your feedback. So thank you.
So Brian, at the start, you kind of had some circles around like our strategies are written with a lot of additional words that we're kind of really trying to get our values and things. Is there a need to refine them, or like so that they can be a little bit more honed in so that it flows all the way through? Or
if you all are accepting our interpretation, then I think we're good.
Okay.
If you want to put if we want to push and narrow it further, we certainly can. You can see the complexity when you look at address, acknowledge, and reduce. There's 3, right? Systemic disparities, barriers, and equity. There's 3 more. And then you have lead, develop, and align. There's 3 more. There's 9, right? Our district towards continuous improvement. So so your focus, right? Your focus is distributed, right, more broadly. But if there were an opportunity for us to narrow, I think that's what we've attempted to do in our thinking and interpretation.
It almost seemed like I wasn't here, but we were trying to make a pretty sentence.
Yeah, we were trying to make sure everybody's voice was reflected in it. But the reason why I wonder is because the board turns over a lot, and then we each hone in on with so much in there, and I don't want there to be a lot of like this as board changes occur over time. Like I want you to feel like you've got really the right things after all this learning we've done with the new model and the alignment. Just a thought.
Yeah, if you're asking me my honest opinion, it would be vulnerable in the moment. Yes, it would be helpful to have it be more narrow. Yes.
Well, it needs to own it with your chest. I mean, it needs.
Which one? Okay. Right. And a snapshot for each of those things.
Right.
You can see how that creates a set.
Sell it, son. Sell it.
I love the honesty.
When we talk about these at work, we want to make them like almost like a battle cry, right? That's not a legal document, I guess.
A poem.
Yeah.
A poem.
Yeah, right.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Good job, you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, seriously, such a.
Yeah. I don't know how we'll be able to.
Oh, no, just like what we talked about.
900 and 200. So before we adjourn, we did want to give you an update about policy committee. So we are starting to review So today we reviewed 900 and 200 series policies. So we're hoping that y'all can start to take a look at those and offer any feedback.
What are they?
So 200's the board, the bylaws and stuff. So we didn't want to necessarily make changes in policy committee. We're going to advance them to the first reading, but we want the board to review them and
I'll
provide
send
input.
an
Amy
email
will
to
send
the
it.
members of the board with the 200 series and kind of what we discussed, and it's just to give you time to review it before the August meeting.
So you'll get 2 emails, one about those policies that we talked about today, and then you'll get another one about the 500 series, which we are working on next year, which is a lot of student-focused policies, including Policy 508, which does not have procedures. So at some point, we'll also need you all to start taking a look at those as well before we get into policy committee. We did have some conversations today about getting those policies in front of students, like our school board reps, to get their feedback. But we anticipate a lot of discussion with some of those policies.
And the scholars would come to a work session, so they can, you can really talk, not, yeah.
You'll get 2 emails from me.
Just keep cranking on. You.
If I could just mention, I put the Google Doc out there. It's a spreadsheet for you to add work session items. You do need your apps email, so if you don't know what that is, let me quick describe that to you. So when you go to click into it, it'll ask you to enter your email, and so it's your last name, your first initial at apps.district279.org. And that's where actually all of our documents come through, which is probably why sometimes you're like, where is it? What are you talking about? So if you need help, Anthony's right there.
It's in Google Drive, right?
Google Drive, yes.
So
Google
if
Drive.
you go to portal.district279.org, log in with your regular credentials, you'll see the Google icon, click on it, and you'll be right in.
Okay.
See, you know the answer.
All right. I think those are the only updates we have. So meeting adjourned at 8:31.